Right, after Don brought us a truly unique new creation in part one of the programme, I thought I'd take a quick spin through some of the other new models that we can expect to see pitch up during the next few months to try and entice the money from our bank accounts. As I've mentioned before, this is always a really busy few weeks of the year as manufacturers unveil their updates to and occasionally completely new models for the upcoming year, especially during October, because this marks the last few weeks before the biggest and undoubtedly the most important expo of the year, the EICMA show in Milan. In an attempt to try and get us as up to date as possible before EICMA kicks off, I'll try and rush us through a roundup of the major news stories, beginning with the British manufacturer Triumph. Their big news concerns some not so major changes to the 1200 Scramblers, but that's okay because they're models that we're already very fond of and to which we weren't really expecting any big developments. The 1200 XE is still the top of the range and has now been blessed with some tweaks that make it even more capable off-road. These include a change of suspension to Marzocchi from Erlins and Schauer, while the Brembo front calipers have been upgraded to the latest generation of stylemas. The second and possibly now more important version of the 1200, at least in less hardcore dirt riding markets than South Africa, is the X. It has a lower spec than the XE in terms of some components, ground clearance and price, and should probably be regarded as the road-going version of the off-road ready Scrambler. More differentiation like this between the models is probably a good idea and could well increase sales for the X, certainly given what I've seen and witnessed on my travels here in Europe, because whether it's Paris, Milan or London, the 1200 Scramblers I've seen have, and I completely understand why, have been used as cool looking urban commuters. They look great, have an undeniable classy retro charm, are plenty rapid, and they're comfortable enough for everything from highways to potholed backstreets. Before we move on from Triumph, a bit of news specific to the South African market, and it concerns the new babies in the company's range, the 400 Speed and Scrambler. These were originally announced several months ago. In fact, it's such a major move by the Brit manufacturer that we dedicated a whole new segment to the newest and smallest models in the range, and judging by the press material and positive reviews of those who've managed to get a test ride, it looks very much like being a successful transition into the realms of the small capacity bike segment. The only thing I did note, based on my guessing at the potential price point for the new models, was that given the availability of cheap Chinese and occasionally Indian alternatives in a very cost-conscious South Africa, it might be too expensive to succeed on the local market. That was based on my estimation of the retail price being somewhere in the 130,000 Rand range. And as it turns out, like many of my not as educated as I thought guesses, it was way out. Triumph SA has now revealed that when the bikes arrive, sometime during the first quarter of next year, they will be going for, in the case of the Speed 400, 100,000 Rand, while the Scrambler 400X will be 110,000 Rand. I reckon that sort of money will sway a lot of potential customers from hovering on the sidelines to making a commitment and getting themselves into the Triumph club, so to speak. Anyway, let's move on from little Triumphs to big Hondas, big Twins and big Africa. Sorry, that was a terrible link to news of the updated Africa Twin. I should say Africa Twins, because there's two of them that now constitute the range. The CRF 1100L Africa Twin, which is the more rugged of the two, and then the more touring road bias version, which is the Africa Twin Adventure Sports. The Adventure Sports road bias is confirmed by the switch from a 21-inch front wheel to a 19-incher, and the fact that it will only be available with DCT, or dual clutch transmission. Basically Honda's idea of an auto gearbox that also allows you to determine when you swap the cogs, which you do via handlebar mounted buttons, the equivalent of paddles on a car steering wheel. The suspension also gets 15 mils less travel to go with its road touring duties, and some thicker padding for its seat, while the off-road CRF has the option of some electronic shower suspension. Both models have been the recipients of some mild engine work that maintains the 101 horsepower peak but adds 7% to the max torque number of 113 Newton meters that now also arrives usefully earlier in the rev range. And to round off the updates that apply to both models, we have the redesigned front fairing that now incorporates a 5-way adjustable screen for vastly improved wind protection. Time, I think, to change the pace a bit before we cover some more adventure bike news, and we'll do that with the continuing, somewhat bewildering but always amusing story of Buell that is either in the middle of one of the greatest motorcycling comebacks in history or is about to collapse under the psychological weight of so many good news stories and deliriously ambitious promises regarding production of an extensive new model range. Said range has so far consisted of models that essentially existed when the new owners bought the dying Buell brand, namely a superbike and a super naked, to which they've added a couple of rough-looking prototypes, including a spectacularly ugly super tourer, an admirably bonkers but not very useful dune racing dirt bike, and a decent looking and performing cruiser designed by Roland Sands. Unsurprisingly, the Sands Super Cruiser has received the most interest from the public, and even though there's not much available in the way of detail and first deliveries aren't expected until 2025 at the earliest, Buell is saying it has got, and this is for a bike that we think will retail for about $40,000, in the region of $120 million worth of pre-orders, or about 3,000 bikes. Are these 3,000 orders with deposits, or 3,000 mild expressions of interest from previous Buell owners, or indeed 3,000 ticks on an internet questionnaire? I don't know. And neither do I know how Roland Sands will react to attaching his name and reputation to the quality of 3,000 bikes coming from an as yet non-functioning factory. We wish them luck, we really do, but we can't help feeling that they're going to need an unfeasibly large amount of the stuff to succeed. Okay, back to the adventure segment and onto a manufacturer that has already claimed the World Superbike and World Supersport titles this year, and will also, in the next month or so, do the same with the MotoGP Championship. I am, of course, referring to Ducati, and who knows, given the success of its recent DesertX model and the previous stage-winning Dakar exploits of one of its World Superbike riders, Danilo Petrucci, maybe the Italian manufacturer fancies a bit of World Rally silverware in its already gargantuan trophy cabinet. The new rally version of the already good-looking DesertX now has the obligatory high front fender, more adjustable, longer travel suspension and thus increased ground clearance, tougher and lighter XL wheels, and its suite of rider aids has been fine-tuned to deal with the expected higher demands of a more experienced rider. Staying with Ducati, sort of, and very briefly, we have this 400cc Panigale. Yes, it is a twin, though a parallel one in this instance. No, it is not actually a Panigale, and neither, in fact, is it a Ducati. It is actually a Ducasu. Can't believe I said that. The bike looks like a Ducati, and even the font for the badging looks like it's a direct copy. But it's not Italian. It is, of course, Chinese. Sigh, laugh or cry, one thing your response should not be is surprise. My huge professional respect and admiration for Ducati is tempered somewhat by this kind of thing, though. It won't make a fuss about this blatant ripping off of its intellectual property rights because access to the Chinese market by both itself and its senior German partners means that, just as with China's questionable behaviour in other arenas, this will simply, if unfortunately and I believe mistakenly, be regarded as a price worth paying for continued operations in China. And finally, always wanted to say that, should do this really, eh? And finally, A bike I can't see us getting in SA, but it's about to hit dealer floors here in Europe. So if you want what is touted as the world's first production hybrid bike, maybe Kawasaki will let you order one. It's the Ninja 7 Hybrid. I first saw this at last year's EICMA Expo, and it will make its worldwide debut over here in Europe sometime around the end of the first quarter next year, but no info as yet on pricing. As its name suggests, it has both a petrol-powered engine, a 451cc parallel twin, and an electric motor that generates the equivalent of about 12 horsepower. With both power plants working simultaneously, it will make just under 70 horsepower. With an already fuel-efficient small capacity engine being helped by an electric motor, has this now become the most economical petrol engine bike on the market? I would love to tell you more, but I've run out of time as usual, so please join us on next week's episode of The Bike Show for more news, views and tests from the world of biking.